Hey, so in the last lesson we were looking at Krakatoa, and now we're going to kind of just do some quick stuff in Nuke. I did want to show a problem with Krakatoa that you can get, and you can see that. You see those blocks? And that'll happen when you use the FumeFX birth, which is why it's really cool that you don't have to use the FumeFX follow. So I would always recommend kind of birthing it from another source, or else you'll get you'll really start to see the voxels come through, and it just looks awful, like a Tetris game. And it starts to break up, but yeah, you can see that those voxels are very apparent. You always want to try and avoid that. So, okay, the tornado. This is it. This is kind of the nuke setup, right? So this is the render. We can take a look at what kind of came out. Let's see if we can zoom in so you can see a little bit more. So the raw render of the FumeFX that I brought in was this. So this is, and we're in sRGB color space, so that was kind of what it looked like. Not beautiful, but that's why we have compositing programs. So I also had a Krakatoa render, which I wasn't too happy with, but whatever. There were parts of it that were kind of interesting. I like this beginning here, where it starts to kind of stick to the ground. That was cool, but ultimately, see, it looks just kind of starts to look like spaghetti, where you get this. I don't know. I wasn't a fan of the look, so I ended up kind of blurring it, giving it a little glow, right, and grading it a couple of times, and then I did a little dilate operation on it to kind of reduce it in size. Then I blurred that dilate, and I used that as a mask for like a merge. So you can see like the alpha channel now has that kind of dilate held out in it, and because I wanted to get it look like these particles were kind of mixing with each other, so you get the FumeFX comped correctly. So now, as you see, when I bring it together, they're kind of like in there, but if like we didn't have this mask, it would just look totally A over B, which starts to look really weird. You can see it doesn't look that bad because, see, there you go. Because I'm actually keyframing the Krakatoa over time. Like I liked it in the beginning, but I didn't like it at the end because then I just kind of wanted it to fume when it got really big here. So don't be afraid to make a bunch of elements. That's really how effects start to come together. Is you make a lot of stuff and you combine it together and you just try and fill the screen. That's really your goal. One standout element isn't going to do it. You need a ton of them, and then you can kind of just mix them together. And sometimes you'll make a beautiful element, and you'll pretty much only see a teeny portion of it. You'll just throw it away, but that's all in there, and you can see all of that going on. So we can just do some color corrections to it to kind of get more of that look that we ended up with. And then I merged it over gray just because I always feel like it's cheating when you show it on black because everything looks really good on black. Because you can see a lot more detail. Now, you'll notice in the FumeFX, you get these artifacts from the particles. And really, really frustrating when you see this kind of stuff going on here, like right here, and this kind of, it's just gross, It's like you can see they're coming from this point. Especially look at this size. There, this side here, it's like tattered jeans or something, or like a torn cloth, especially there. It just looks really, really gross. So what can you kind of do to address some of that stuff? Well, we actually don't use Nuke at work. We use Fusion, which is a different compositing program. I think Nuke's a little better, but you can see, okay, and they have this refraction node in Fusion, and it's essentially what iDistort is. It's a little better in Fusion, but iDistort in Nuke is more powerful because you can do a lot of things with it. So you can see what I'm basically doing is trying to distort this stuff. So what did I do? I basically took this Krakatoa render as a mask for the iDistort. So now let's see. Let's play around with the iDistort. Can start to like push this stuff. And the UV scale, let's just try, let's see what happens here. So you can see how this is it at 0, right? This is the render. But then as I kind of dial up this effect, we start to distort the image based on this mask up here. So now we've kind of gotten rid of all that stuff, and it's pretty cool. Like you don't think about it. It looks kind of squiggly and interesting compared to this. So sometimes it looks weird. It looks weird too, but I'd rather have that than the rather have that than that. So I'd rather have a crazy. So you can go over the top with it too and get terrible looking renders. But it's a powerful tool. Sometimes it's just called displacement. So use it wisely. And now I've added a bunch of keyframes, but it's a pretty cool way of sometimes fixing problems. You can also occasionally get lucky if you have some artifacts with using OFlow. So we can use optical flow, and that's a way, the way of like faking motion blur. It's what I had to use in school when you like couldn't afford to render it. So what we can do is we can set the speed to 1, so it's normal, and then we can just start to add the shutter time. We can add some shutter samples, and it'll start to try and interpolate motion blur in there. And you can sometimes you can hide a little bit there, which is nice. You can see it's just calculating the vectors of like the motion vectors of a 2D image and applying the motion blur that way. So it's kind of like a last resort, but sometimes it can help you. It can help you, and you can see you can kind of blur stuff away, and then maybe you roto on a mask here, so you're only doing that to that part, so then you can keep the original image. But it's just a tool to kind of help you solve problems should they be there. I mean, that of course is like crazy. It's like some crazy motion blur, but it fixed our problem area, so we could kind of roto that together and take from that. I kind of like iDistort. I think it does a better job than OFlow, because OFlow ultimately at the end of the day is just motion blur, whereas iDistort's like a displacement. So we can add an iDistort, right? Drop it in here. Look at it, and it's not going to do anything by default, so nothing's happening. But if we plug in a mask image, so you can take it from anything like fractal noise or whatever, and a really nice way of kind of making making refractive effects can be to use the normals pass. And the project I just finished up at Blur, I did a lot of that because I had to do some cloaking shots where people like turn invisible. I think I might have some videos of the kind of stuff you can do with iDistort on my desktop. It's like this Morden. I made this guy as a test, Morden turn invisible. This was gonna look through my tons of files here. So you got Morden kind of can turn him invisible with things like iDistort, which is pretty cool. So you can get kind of refractive effects, stuff like that, which is always fun. So, okay, back to Nuke. So that's kind of how you can kind of quickly composite this Krakatoa stuff on top. It's never going to be perfect, and that's kind of frustrating because you'd like it to just be A over B, but you have to do a little bit of work sometimes. So you can see I liked it on the corner and on the edges here, where you really start to really add some detail that the Fume just doesn't have, and I thought that kind of gave it the extra mile there that it really needed. So if we look with the iDistort, which we didn't really dial up. So okay, that's the basics of kind of compositing some effects in Nuke, and I should say that compositing is actually a huge part of effects. So I would venture a guess that most of the effects I do are like 70% compositing. You're rendering elements out of the 3D program, but ultimately you're bringing it into the compositing app and doing a lot there. It really depends on the effect. Sometimes if you have an effect that's in a bunch of shots, then you'll want to go for that all 3D solution where there's a couple of different camera angles. But sometimes if it's just like a one-off, you can just composite the whole thing. And what I've been getting into lately is using 2.5D compositing. Like in Fusion, it's easy to set up. It's better here in Nuke because you can actually bring deforming geometry in. But yeah, I'll get a FBX camera of my scene, and then I'll I'll just place like 2D cards. If you can mix real and not real and have it be a little bit believable, then the human brain is just going to not know what to do, and that's really your goal, is just to trick people. You're trying to trick them into thinking what they're seeing looks kind of real, even though it's completely implausible and impossible. Okay, so that's the end of the nuke lesson. It was pretty quick, pretty brief. Okay, thanks guys.